Fall of Acre, the siege that shook the Holy Land. What happens when two kings, one sick in bed, the other fresh from conquering Cyprus, decide to crush a city that's already been under siege for 653 days? Why did thousands of Crusaders chew horse entrails and grass, while trebuchets hurled stones into the market square? And how did a tower nicknamed Bad Neighbor become the most feared piece of medieval real estate in the Holy Land? This isn't just a siege, this is the story you've been waiting for. Now let's dive in. It all began on July 4th, 1187, when the Crusader army marched into the furnace of Hattin and came out as ash. Saladin, the Sultan of Strategy and Scimitar, delivered a masterclass in battlefield annihilation. The Christian army was obliterated, the True Cross captured, and King Guy of Lusignan taken prisoner, his crown slipping into the dust. With the Crusaders broken, Saladin swept through the Holy Land like a sandstorm with a vendetta. In mere months, Acre, Haifa, Caesarea, Jaffa, and Sidon fell into Muslim hands. The cities surrendered like dominoes, and the Crusader map began to look like a very bad investment. In Jerusalem, Balian of Ibelin held out with a ragtag defense until October, when he surrendered the city. But Saladin, ever the gentleman warrior, allowed native Christians to stay and escorted the rest out peacefully. It was a conquest with courtesy, except for one stubborn thorn: Tyre. Tyre, the well-fortified port city, refused to budge, and just in time, a certain Italian noble named Conrad of Montferrat arrived aboard a Genoese ship. Handsome, charismatic, and fresh off victories against Frederick Barbarossa's enemies, Conrad was the medieval equivalent of a Netflix heartthrob with a sword. By sheer luck and timing, Conrad became the de facto Christian leader in the Levant. Tyre was his stage, and he was ready to perform. Across the Mediterranean, Pope Urban III allegedly died from shock upon hearing the news of Hattin. His successor, Pope Gregory VIII, issued the papal bull Audita Tremendi on October 29, 1187, calling for a new crusade to retake Jerusalem. Despite the Second Crusade being a historical faceplant, interest in the Levant remained strong. Prince Richard, soon to be Richard the Lionheart, took the cross before the papal bull even dropped, like pre-ordering vengeance. King Henry II of England and King Philip II of France joined the cause, urged on by Jocelyn, Archbishop of Tyre, who practically begged them to set aside their royal squabbles and save the East. Philip of Flanders joined soon after, and together they introduced the Saladin tithe, a massive levy to fund the crusade. But on July 6, 1189, Henry II died, leaving Richard to lead the English contingent. Meanwhile, Frederick Barbarossa took the cross in Mainz, committing the German people to the cause. Back in the Levant, Saladin released Guy of Lusignan in 1188, on the condition that he wouldn't take up arms again. Guy promptly broke that promise like a dropped chalice. He joined Balian in Tripoli, gathered refugees, and tried to reclaim his throne. But when Guy arrived at Tyre, Conrad refused him entry. A rivalry brewed: 2 men, 1 crown, and 0 chill. Guy, tired of waiting, turned his army toward Acre in August 1189, hoping to recapture the city and establish his base. With 700 knights and 9,000 infantry, he marched along the Scandalian Pass, avoiding the interior where Saracen scouts lurked. Saladin, encamped at Belfort Castle, hesitated. Was this a trap? A feint? A medieval prank? He stayed put. Guy reached Acre and climbed the Toron Hill by night, gaining a defensible position with a view of the city. On August 28, 1189, Guy's army encamped between the Toron and Acre's walls. The Siege of Acre had begun. Saladin mobilized his empire. Troops from Mosul, Sinjar, Diyarbakir, and beyond answered the call. On August 30th, Saladin camped at Tel Kaysan, forming a crescent around the Crusaders. Guy was now trapped between Acre's defenders and Saladin's army. On September 1st, Guy launched a premature assault on Acre's walls. With no siege engines ready, his infantry stormed forward with ladders. Arrows flew, rocks fell, and a brutal melee erupted. But messengers brought word: Saladin's main army was approaching. Guy aborted the attack. Luckily, reinforcements arrived. A fleet of Danes, Welsh, and Cornish landed mid-September. Days later, James of Avezens arrived with 50 ships and 14,000 Flemings, Frisians, Germans, and Bretons. James took command of field operations, sharing duties with Ludwig III of Thuringia. More troops came from Tyre, led by Conrad and Gerardo, Bishop of Ravenna. The harbor was so packed with ships, one Muslim observer said it looked like tangled thickets. On September 14th, Saladin attacked the Crusader lines. He hoped to break the siege and reach Acre. The Crusaders held firm. Saladin's cavalry found a weak spot north of the city and pushed hard, but the Christians reformed, built a shield wall, and retook the ground. Unable to break through, Saladin extended his own lines to besiege the besiegers. His cavalry opened supply lines to Acre, but couldn't stop the steady stream of Christian reinforcements arriving by sea. Then came the bombshell. Frederick Barbarossa had reached Constantinople with an army reportedly 200,000 strong. Saladin panicked. He sent letters to emirs and caliphs begging for reinforcements, but many vassals deserted, fearing for their own lands. On October 4th, the Crusaders attacked Saladin's camp at Tel al-Ayadiyah. The army was arranged in 3 lines. Left wing, Conrad and Gerardo, mostly Italians. Right wing, Guy, Knights Hospitaller, Italians and French. Center, Andrew of Brienne and Lubig III, near the Mosque of Ain Bakar. Archers led the charge, followed by infantry and cavalry. The battle was fierce, the stakes monumental. Now pause for a sec. Join the front lines of history and power. Welcome to European Battle, where epic clashes, legendary warriors, and untold stories come alive. By subscribing and turning on notifications, you're not just joining a channel. You're stepping into a world of thrilling battles. From ancient empires to modern warfare, we deliver cinematic storytelling, expert insights, and exclusive content that will leave you breathless. Don't just watch history, live it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a moment of the action. European Battle, where legends clash. The morning sun rose over Acre like a torch over a powder keg. At the center of the Crusader formation stood Templar Grand Master Gerard de Riedfort, a man whose beard was as sharp as his sword. In front of the Templars stood Catalan and German foot soldiers, bracing for impact like the front row at a joust. Back at camp, Geoffrey of Lusignan, Guy's brother, remained behind with James of Avezins and his men, ready to intercept any sorties from the garrison. They were the insurance policy, the last line of defense, and the only ones not charging headlong into chaos. Opposing them was a mosaic of Muslim might. On the far right by the sea stood Taqi al-Din, Saladin's nephew, with his elite cavalry. Closer in were Saladin's sons, al-Afdal and al-Zahir, flanked by soldiers from Mosul under the lord of Hisn Kaifa. The left wing was a patchwork of warriors, Asadiya troops, Mamluks of Asad al-Din Shirkuh, Sinjar soldiers under Mujahid al-Din Yarunkush, and Kurdish contingents led by Emir Mujali and others. Saladin himself rode in the center, surrounded by his regulars and a personal guard of military slaves. Each wing was screened by skirmishers, like chess pawns waiting to be sacrificed. At 9 a.m., the Crusaders struck the Muslim advance guard like a hammer on glass. The Templars and Hospitallers rode through enemy ranks, scattering infantry and archers. The battle bogged down for 4 hours, a grinding clash of steel and sweat. Then the Italians on the Crusader left wing pushed into the Muslim right. Taqi al-Din, ever the tactician, ordered a feigned retreat to lure them away. But Saladin, seeing his nephew pull back, panicked and sent reinforcements from his center. A critical error. The Crusaders saw the thinning line and charged. Cavalry thundered through the gap, infantry followed like a tide. The Muslim second line crumbled. A general rout began. The right flank fled to Tel al-Ayadiyah, the center scattered toward Kawana, Tiberias, or even Damascus. Then came the fatal flaw. The Crusaders who broke into the Muslim camp began looting. Driven by hunger and greed, they raided tents for gold, food, and anything not nailed down. The charge halted. Momentum died. Saladin, with only a handful of retainers, scrambled to rally his left wing and the remnants of his center. Meanwhile, the Acre garrison, silent all day, finally joined the fight. The Crusader left wing was now sandwiched between Taqi al-Din's forces and the garrison. Saladin seized the moment. His left wing surged forward. The rallied center joined in. The looters were caught mid-plunder. Those fleeing were cut down from behind. The Crusader center collapsed. The left wing retreated to camp. Taqi al-Din turned and struck their flank in a pincer movement. It was a massacre. Crusaders fled in chaos, chased to the outskirts of their camp. Only the arrival of Geoffrey of Lusignan's reserves prevented total annihilation. Saladin's forces withdrew, having nearly broken the siege. Casualties? Around 7,000 Muslims and 10,000 Crusaders perished. The field was soaked in blood and ambition. After the defeat, Crusader leaders ordered a prolonged siege. Saladin rearranged his army behind them, giving the Crusaders breathing room. More reinforcements arrived, including 400 Danish warriors and the nephew of King Canute VI. The Crusaders dug protective ditches filled with sharpened stakes and metal, flanked by earthen ramparts and wooden palisades. Then came the rain squalls and heavy mists, winter's cruel whisper. By year's end, nature favored the Muslims. Winds blew away tents atop the Turan. Christian ships couldn't anchor. Many left or were burned for warmth. Inside Acre, the garrison starved. They offered to surrender in exchange for their lives. The Crusaders, drunk on dreams of glory, refused. But salvation came from the sea. On December 17th, Hosam ad-Din Lulu, a daring Armenian admiral, led 50 Egyptian galleys into the harbor. Using Greek fire, he brushed aside Crusader ships and delivered supplies. The garrison cheered. On Easter Sunday, March 25, 1190, Conrad of Montferrat arrived with 50 ships from Tyre. He and Guy had reconciled. But before reaching Acre, Conrad's fleet was intercepted. A naval battle raged all day, Greek fire, arrows, bolts, but the Christians prevailed. Fresh troops poured in through March and April. Guy launched surprise attacks, breaking Saladin's supply lines and isolating Acre. With the ground drying, the Crusaders built 4-story siege towers, each holding 500 men. Covered in hides soaked in vinegar and urine, yes, really, they believed they were fireproof. The towers terrified the garrison. They offered to surrender. The Crusaders refused, again. On May 5, 1190, the towers rolled forward. Archers battled on platforms. Peasants filled the moat with rocks and brush. The first tower dropped its bridge onto the parapet. Crusaders surged in, but behind them, horror unfolded. The defenders unleashed explosive jars of Greek fire. All 3 towers caught fire. Wood creaked. Flames roared. The towers collapsed, killing everyone inside. Those who made it onto the walls were cut down and thrown off. The assault had failed miserably. June opened with 8 successive days of carnage. The heat baked the siege camp like a clay oven, and the bodies piled up like grim monuments to ambition. Flies swarmed in thick black clouds. Disease didn't discriminate. It gripped both Muslim and Christian camps alike. The battlefield stank of death and desperation. Then, silence. For nearly a month, the siege became a waiting game. But Crusader men-at-arms weren't known for patience. St. James Day, the trap is sprung. On July 25th, the Crusaders launched a bold assault north of Acre. Peasant pikemen and axemen surged forward, catching Saladin's men off guard. But it was a trap. Al-Adil, Saladin's brother, lured the poorly trained footmen into his camp. The attack devolved into looting. Saladin sent reinforcements from Egypt and Mosul, trapping the Crusaders in their own greed. Only a few dozen knights joined the charge, led by Ralph de Hardiv, Archdeacon of Colchester. Ralph and his armored retinue carved a path out, but Ralph fell, and 9,000 Crusaders died in the failed assault. 3 days later, Henry of Champagne arrived with 10,000 fresh troops, the vanguard of King Philip II's army. By autumn, Baldwin, Archbishop of Canterbury, landed with news. Richard the Lionheart was en route. But then came a blow to Crusader morale. Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, had drowned on June 10th. His army fractured. Only 5,000 survivors reached Tripoli and joined the siege in October. Henry of Champagne launched repeated assaults using battering rams and ladders, but Muslim sallies destroyed his siege engines in early September. On September 24th, the Christian fleet attacked Acre's harbor, aiming to destroy the Tower of Flies. Explosive ramming vessels surged forward, but the wind shifted. The ships collided with each other. Amid the chaos, Muslim raiders slipped through the smoke and set fire to the Pisan flagship. By the time the Christians realized, the damage was done. Naval supremacy was lost. The winter of 1192-91 was merciless. Plague and famine ravaged the Crusader camp. Henry of Champagne nearly died. Frederick of Swabia succumbed to malaria on January 20th. Food ran out. Soldiers chewed grass, bones, even horse entrails. The siege became a test of endurance. Relief came on April 20th, 1191, when King Philip of France landed with grain, corn, soldiers, and siege engines. On June 8th, Richard I of England arrived with 25 ships, fresh from conquering Cyprus. Philip, older and more experienced, wanted a slow siege, but the Crusader leadership deferred to Richard the Lionheart, famed for his ferocity in battle. Richard targeted the cursed tower at Acre's northeast corner. He deployed his trebuchet, Bad Neighbor, and the Hospitaler's catapult, Stone Thrower. Bombardment began on June 14th. The Templars attacked the eastern walls. The Duke of Burgundy fired on the northern fortifications. Richard and Philip, both sick, directed operations from their tents. Hospitaller artillery demolished a 30-square-foot section of wall near the cursed tower. Skirmishes continued. Saladin's advance guard probed the Crusader rear. On July 2nd, Richard launched round-the-clock assaults. Infantry, archers, and artillery battered the walls. Philip's sappers tunneled beneath the cursed tower. By July 7th, Acre's defenders sent a final plea for help. On July 11th, Philip's sappers collapsed the rest of the tower. The breach widened. The defenders, too weak to hold it, resorted to Greek fire, killing 40 Crusaders, the last casualties of the siege. As the sun rose on July 12th, the 653rd day of the siege, Acre surrendered. Against Saladin's wishes, the garrison capitulated. 19,000 Crusaders had died. 5,000 to 10,000 Muslim defenders perished. Saladin's relief army suffered terribly. Then came the final savage act. Richard the Lionheart ordered the execution of 2,700 Muslim prisoners, likely because Saladin refused to pay ransom or return the true cross. The siege fractured Crusader unity. Philip of France and Leopold of Austria returned to Europe in anger. Richard, victorious but weary, pressed on toward Jerusalem. The Siege of Acre was the blood-soaked prologue to the Third Crusade, a tale of kings, betrayal, and relentless ambition. Next up, the Battle of Kosovo. If you've been gripped by this tale of fire and fury, don't forget to follow us, subscribe, click the notification bell so you never miss another epic chapter in the saga of history's greatest conflicts.